Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss best practices with data center consolidation strategies in the federal government. With me today on the show are Rear Admiral Robert Day, the Chief Information Officer of the United States Coast Guard, Brigadier General Joseph Brendler, the Acting Deputy Chief Information Officer, G6, U.S. Army, Paul Christman, the VP at Dell Software Public Sector, Stephen Cronin, the Director of Government Sales, Schneider Electric IT Federal Solutions, and Colin Coyle, the Principal U.S. Public Sector Lead, HP Enterprise Group Technology Services Consulting. Let's get right into the show. Let's talk data centers. Boy, data centers have been a popular topic the last few years. Let's hear a little bit about what's going on. Let's talk a little bit about progress with data center consolidation. Let's start with Rear Admiral Day. Rear Admiral Day, can you give us some updates on what's going on with data centers in the Coast Guard?
Well, as I say, ever since the challenge was laid out there by the OMB 25-point plan, each of the agencies had a significant emphasis on this, and progress has been made. Luckily, the Coast Guard, I was pretty much centralized starting out the gate with really only one or two what I'd consider major data centers. And we're looking at those. Our main one out in West Virginia continues to assume data floors around the service that was there. Not only that, I'm looking to my DoD partners as well to draw some capabilities from them that I can close down small capabilities. Good example is email. Move into DISA email. Say we've done it on the SIPRNet side now and start moving into the NIPRNet side over the next couple of years. The other piece is the other data center that is a larger one is our finance center down in Chesapeake.
Right.
And we'll be moving to a shared service provider. We haven't decided whether it'll be a federal shared service provider yet or a commercial, but within 18 to 24 months, that floor will close out there and moved into that shared service environment. So we're starting to see the success there. It's a challenge at times. We'll talk about that a little bit more, some of the challenges of doing this, but progress has been made. And as I say, between those capabilities I can draw from other data centers, particularly DISA, because of the dot mill environment that I work in, we're seeing that progress, and in some cases, some efficiencies and effectiveness. So.
Terrific, terrific. We'll get back to that. I want to hear about some of the benefits too coming out of this. Brigadier General Brendler, what? Well, we heard Admiral Day talk about DISA and email. I believe the Army is also in the consolidation of the email. What else do you have going on in terms of progress with data centers over at U.S. Army?
Thanks, Jim. The Army is fairly pleased with our progress in the execution of our data center consolidation plan. Since its beginning in 2011, we've officially closed 138 data centers.
Wow.
That represents 108% of our goal for this year.
Wow, terrific.
So we're doing fairly well. And thanks to that momentum, we've exceeded our current expectation for our consolidation goal of 185 data centers by 2015.
Wow.
This said, though, I think it is necessary to caveat the numbers a little bit. While that represents 73% to date of the goal we had intended to achieve by 2015, through the execution of this plan, I think it's actually more important that we've established improved transparency and visibility and accountability for our inventory.
Oh, good.
So whereas in 2010, when we were getting ready to kick this off, we thought we had 250 data centers, and we thought that was a lot. We now know that we've got over 900 facilities that meet the OMB definition of a data center.
I've been keeping up with that in the reading, that the number keeps changing, and then what is a data center sometimes hard to define too.
So we've done very well against our existing and previous goals, but I expect that as a result of our increased visibility on what our inventory is and our increasing appetite for data center closures, we're going to see our goal increased in the coming years. So whereas right now we have a goal of 185 out of what we thought was 250, we expect that by the end of this coming year, the DoD will reset our goal to over 500.
Wow.
So we've got a long way to go still.
Yeah, but still, sounds like a lot of progress being made. Paul Christman over Dell. Tell us how Dell positions to support data center consolidation. What kind of role are you playing, and what kind of progress are you seeing?
Well, I wanted to follow on to what General said just a second ago. I think the most important progress that's been made is baselining. And the baselining is where Dell software can help. We can identify assets. We can actually help improve the inventorying of all sorts of services that may not have been apparent in the initial baselining and goal setting.
Mm-hmm.
It's the software that helps expedite the improved baselining, inventorying, and then setting goals
Right.
and setting new service levels for applications in the new consolidated data centers.
Right.
I think it's sort of interesting to look at the metrics that were laid out based on the original assessment and inventorying of the data centers. Some people could claim that we're moving backwards, but I think we are actually moving forwards from a 0.9 position to a 1.0 position, where we now know what we have.
Right.
And then we can actually move forward with an appropriate consolidation
Right. Once you
plan.
get the baseline, you can also work some strategies to, are there ways we can modernize and streamline before moving? I mean, it makes no sense to me to move old stuff into a new building. You want to modernize as the process takes place.
And I'd like to follow up on that later on when we talk about the benefits on how we manage these new consolidated data centers.
Stephen Cronin over at Schneider Electric, tell us how you're positioned. What are you doing to support this data center consolidation movement?
Well, as our customers are actually in varying stages of progression on consolidation. So we're really focused on trying to help them achieve their goals as they progress during the various stages. Specifically focused on trying to educate and provide a migration path towards the high-density, high-efficiency IT environment from the perspective of the physical infrastructure. I think what we're seeing as customers are progressing is that there's a growing realization that there's a lot more to consider than just the IT hardware when it comes to consolidating.
Right.
The actual physical infrastructure plays a major role in improving efficiency.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of stuff about energy efficiencies and new cooling devices and new technologies and things like that make it pretty exciting as we move along in this. Colin Coyle over at HP Enterprise Group, gives some ideas of how you're positioned in helping your customers with their data center consolidation.
Sure. So we sort of we cover the entire spectrum, if you will. HP being a pretty broad company of services and products, and we really look at it really from the baselining all the way through to the solutions at the back end. So all the way down to public cloud solutions at the far end, and baselining, surveying, trying to help you understand what you've got to start with, based a lot on our own history.
Right.
HP's gone through a pretty dramatic and industry-leading data center consolidation of our own, consolidating 86 data centers worldwide into 6 data centers here in the U.S. And through that period, we were able to lower our IT spend by about half, from about 4% to 2% of our revenue, which was a pretty incredible journey to go on. So we really look at it through that full spectrum to really help folks at the beginning of the journey to understand what could be offloaded to community and public clouds, working with a lot of federal agencies currently, and those that are going to be maybe like the DISs of the world, going to be more the community cloud providers downstream. So.
Yeah, terrific. It's interesting for me to watch like the pendulum swing. We were centralized, then we decentralized everything. Now we're pulling everything back. It's just an interesting observation the way the trends have gone and over the various eras here. Of course, if we're going through this data center consolidation, we're doing it because we're expecting some benefits to come out the other end. What are some of the benefits that we're seeing or achieving? Let's start with Brigadier General Joseph Brendler. What are some of the benefits you're seeing coming out of the data center consolidations?
Well, speaking in just terms of hard numbers, we've seen through the closures that I mentioned before, almost $29 million annually in direct savings. We've additionally produced about 55,000 square feet of floor space efficiency, which we don't know exactly how to translate into a dollar figure because we haven't actually stopped using that floor space. It's just been converted to other purposes or is available to be converted to other purposes.
Intuitively, though, there's advantages there because you now have additional space to do things.
And on top of that, we've also decommissioned about 1,100 physical servers. So we're pretty proud of those initial achievements. But as I mentioned before, I think that it's even more important that through this process, we've actually started to learn more about ourselves. We've learned better how to go after the inventorying process, and we've got better visibility and accountability for our infrastructure and our inventory. I think that's actually kind of critical, because as you might say, you can't manage what you can't see, and we can see ourselves better now.
Yeah, that's actually back to the energy kind of things there. If you can baseline and know what you have, then you can measure going forward to see what you're achieving in terms of energy savings and so forth. Rear Admiral Day, what do you think? What are some of the benefits you're seeing for the Coast Guard achieving by going through this process?
Well, I think we've kind of hit on a theme here. It's a standardization of processes. We had multiple places doing business different ways. And that standardized processes, and really the most important place, is from a security standpoint. Now we're starting to build the right security regimes that we need based on the threats that we're seeing, and have standardized capabilities to do that. Recent threats that we've had, were dealt with differently all over the place in these different centers. Now having a common platform from a security standpoint greatly helps, as well as those standardized processes. The other pieces that you really see, and we've talked about that, is reduced footprint, power savings, taking and leveraging the new blade in virtual environments, so you're able to actually do some physical savings there. The other piece is when you have these services centralized in one location, you can take real advantage of things like an enterprise service bus, where now you're starting to share information across what used to be stovepipe systems. And with that, now you can start using a common business intelligence system, a common GIS, and start driving these individual stovepipes more to a architecture that is integrated and, most importantly, is securable.
Yeah, terrific. That security, we've had that discussion a number of times, that over the years we've been doing Band-Aid approaches to security, fixing things after they break and patching everything. And we wound up with so many different products and patches and security that when you go to a consolidation here, it gives you a clean slate kind of to put your hands around it and really think, what do we really need now in way of security? Colin, Coyle over at HP, what do you think? What are some of the benefits you're seeing your customers achieve by going through the data center consolidations?
Well, right along the lines of what we just heard, I mean, I mentioned in our own data center consolidation the cost savings and the footprint savings, but at the end of the day, that wasn't really what ours was about, and it's not what it's usually about for our customers either. It's about transforming and taking the 80-20 rule and kind of flipping it on its head. So we used to spend about 80% of our time and energy working on our own enterprise to manage and monitor our own enterprise, and 20% on, in our case, research and development, or in the case of our government customers, their mission. So how do you flip those two things around? And that's what we've really found, a much more mobile workforce. Mobility is such an important issue to us now. We need to have the backbone tomorrow. And through our consolidation, we were able to do that, to flip that paradigm around, that 80% of our energy, as far as our workforce is concerned, and our actual raw energy, we had a huge savings in energy as well, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. But energy is a great way to not only hit sustainability goals, which most of the government agencies have those, but also to help capitalize all the investment that's going to be necessary to be able to bridge you over to this new environment.
Terrific. Paul Christman, what do you think over at Dell? What are you seeing as some of the biggest benefits that are coming out of this effort?
I'd put it into three different categories.
Okay.
One is the opportunity for process improvement, and I'm not talking about huge, large, complicated government processes. I'm talking about the everyday, mundane IT management, keeping the lights on kind of thing. Bringing these services together in a consolidated data center gives us an opportunity to see what people do on the front lines in order to achieve their jobs. And I think it's those small, in some cases very small, but incremental improvements on process improvement. That gets me to the second point, which is human resources utilization. I think we're asking our IT professionals to do higher value activities rather than the mundane things. So you get better utilization of people doing smarter things And through the automation of the everyday, the routine, I think you get better human resources utilization. And third, to Admiral Day's comment, it's a reduction of the threat surface. I think in a sort of a visual picture, by consolidating these data centers, you're just reducing the attack surface that external actors have, as well as the internal actors have for misuse of information technology. So those are the three different areas I think we're really going to see benefits in.
Yeah, outstanding. Stephen Cronin, it's always dangerous, I guess, to be last. You could kind of say ditto, but can you add to the discussion here? A couple other things come to mind, perhaps, from your perspective in terms of benefits that around this data center consolidation activity.
Sure. Simply put, dramatic gains in efficiency and decreasing energy usage.
Yeah.
We have a multi-pronged approach to helping our customers with consolidation. Our hardware approach is called taking a pod approach to the data center. So this is a high-efficiency, high-density pod. It's basically a self-contained data center with high-efficiency UPS, racks, cooling distribution, and software. And this solution allows you to place it in the middle of an inefficient data center. It allows you to migrate over time. It's actually executable much faster than a traditional data center solution.
Wow.
And you can take PUE. In the federal space, PUEs can range power usage effectiveness anywhere from 2 to 3. With this approach, you can get all the way down to 1.35, but with much higher densities than you would see in a traditional data center.
Be curious. I might want to follow up and learn a little bit more about that. Let's talk a little bit now. We talked about some of the benefits, but and I guess we talked data center consolidations. We've got agencies, moving to create these data centers. Then we also have this cloud trend that's big, and then we have managed services trends that are big. How do they sort of meld together here? Rear Admiral Day, how does cloud and managed service and data centers, how do they sort of, how do you sort out what goes where and what's in the public cloud, what's in the private cloud, what's in my data center, what's a managed service, what do we do?
This is probably the thing that gets bannered around this town more than anything is what is the cloud?
Right.
And it's all cloud. I mean, when we're collapsing data centers, really what we're doing is creating a private cloud that's accessible. Now, again, there's numerous offerings that are starting to come, particularly in the public sector, which is private sector also, that is, now providing FedRAMP certified cloud services that are now available for federal and other customers to use. And it's the question of finding out what is best to put in each one of those environments. The way I look at it is commodity type of services are sometimes going to be best suited for going out to some of these service providers who provide exactly that service, and we don't have to build it inside. I still think that most of the critical operational and mission systems are going to be inside of a federal data center because it is mission related, and we're going to have that there and want the assurances of that level of operation, including some of the legacy systems that we're bringing along that have been there for 15, 20, some even many more years.
Right.
And so it's a matter of deciding what fits best. For me, email, why rebuild email when I've got DISA providing the service, and that's why I'll migrate there. And that's a commodity that I'm buying from a federal provider. But there's examples I've got otherwise. My HR system, which includes my military HR, is out in the private cloud or in the public sector. And so it's a matter of making the business case of what fits where. Public-facing stuff I may want to have out in that environment. Right. The stuff that's really mission inherent, I'm probably going to want to keep within one of my data centers.
Understood. And I want to hear from the other panelists on this too, but first we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 Federal AM. Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Rear Admiral Day from the Coast Guard, Brigadier General Brendler from the Army, Paul Christman from Dell, Stephen Cronin from Schneider Electric, and Colin Coyle from HP Enterprise Group Technology Services. We're talking data center consolidation. We're talking about how cloud and managed services fit into the strategy. Brigadier General Brendler, how does cloud and managed services kinds of approach fit into your strategy for data center consolidation?
Well, I'm pretty excited actually to talk about this particular question. The fact is, in my mind, actually, that we're really just getting started here. If you look at the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative as something that's really just getting kicked off, as I mentioned, we're proud of what we've done so far, but we recognize we've got a lot more to do. That's on top of DoD CIO just recently having published their view on what should constitute the core data centers that should make up the DoD data center architecture. A lot less than we thought they were going to indicate that they needed to have. So our objective for consolidation is going to have to be more aggressive than we had initially thought. Again, we got a lot more to do. And I don't think we're entirely certain what we want from our government and industry partners in this space in terms of the service that is coming from inside our data centers. If I start back where Admiral Day had started with the definition of the cloud, in my mind, it's just a metaphor.
That's true.
As an IT guy, cloud is what I say or what I draw on a piece of paper when I'm trying to talk to a combat arms guy in the Army and explain, don't worry about that.
You're right.
I don't want to burden you with the technical complexity of what is inside this thing I'm drawing. So I just draw a cloud, I hook up lines to it, and say, don't worry, I got it, that stuff's going to work. With that perspective, what we do as IT guys is we turn, in some cases, to our government partners like DISA, and the Army has been very successful, and we're very proud of the relationship we have with DISA in this regard, to use them as our government broker and ask them to perform an interface with industry to hook up services for us. But I think that we have the option where it's more cost effective or more advantageous for us in terms of expediency if we've got a highly pressing tactical requirement to go directly to industry and form a relationship with them to acquire services, should that be what we want to do. So I think we still need to work some of these things out. Generally speaking, as I mentioned earlier, we prefer to use DISA as our government partner and work a government-to-government relationship with them. We believe that if all the services do this, we actually enable DISA to do more efficiently what we all need to do, recognizing we're joint dependent. Army in particular recognizes that after 10 years of combat action that we've been going through. And we'd like to be able to use DISA to bring the joint interest to bear for us. So I think we still need to do some work to determine what it is we want to ask DISA to do. Do we want them to turn to industry and ask industry to provide a raw managed service? Or do we want to ask DISA to turn to industry and acquire parts with which they put together the federal data center that Admiral Day was talking about that's managed by federal employees as opposed
to... It sounds to
by
me like it's going to be an
partner.
evolving thing. I mean, I see a future we're going to have public cloud, private cloud, hybrids, some things internal, some things external. And over time, as things change and technology changes, probably will keep evolving, but it's pretty exciting stuff. Paul Christman over at Dell, what do you... how does cloud and managed service figure into your strategies?
With Dell software, we see cloud as a natural evolution as our customers move from physical to virtual and then from virtual to cloud. I don't think of cloud as a thing. I don't think of it as an offering. I think of it as an IT technique. It's a series of enabling technologies, virtualization being the first. And as we move into these consolidated data centers and we become more proficient at managing this virtualized infrastructure, cloud becomes capable or possible. Whether it's an internal cloud, whether it's an external contracted cloud with a third-party provider, maybe it's DISA with the Army, or maybe it's externally with a private company, a contractor, a government contractor, or even a commercial provider. We look at this as saying, IT is moving to where it's least expensive, most flexible, and most appropriate. To Admiral Day's comment, what's the most appropriate place to put this? I think the biggest challenge that we have in doing these sort of hybrid who's providing what service is determining what the unit of measure is for IT production or consumption. And I think that's where we get into a lot of discussions about whether it's important or appropriate to put these shared services in one place or another. We have to decide what it is we're consuming, what it is we're buying, how we're going to pay for it. And a lot of these hybrid environments are going to require some pretty strong definitions and governance models to get the contracting right, to get the payments right, to get to the point where we can make this work.
Yeah, good point, Dan. Something that when we talk challenges, I mean, getting the models and the service level agreements and the shared liabilities and responsibilities are all going to be difficult things for procurement folks that are not used to dealing in those kinds of things. Stephen Cronin, what do you think are some of the things with cloud and managed service that figure into the strategy here?
Well, as it relates to cloud, the concept that I discussed earlier, the pod approach, dovetails in very nicely with the concept of a cloud as it meets all the required reference architecture and facility infrastructure standards.
Right.
From a managed services standpoint, Schneider Electric has mission-critical services throughout the life cycle of the data center. One of the elements under maintenance is we have the ability to provide facility operations, which is going to become more and more critical. We can work directly with our end users, or we can work with the contractor at the facility that manages the overall contract, and we would focus on the physical infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm interested in that pod concept. I'm going to take you up on that afterwards. Colin, how about over at HP? How do you guys work cloud and managed service and data centers? How do they all sort of meld together here? To me, it's hard to talk about one without talking about all three.
It really is. I mean, I think the general said it really well. It's, for his warfighters, the cloud is the thing he worries about, and he wants them to be able to just plug right into it and not have to worry about what's behind it. And I think, private sector's engagement with government and with even commercial enterprises is really not going to be that much different. There's a high security difference in a lot of the government perspective, but there's a lot of that actually in the commercial realm as well.
Sure.
Bankers, for instance, the financial industry is probably every bit as concerned. It may not be quite as mission critical and from a life and death perspective, but they tend to think money's pretty important too.
Yeah,
So
I would think the people that use the banks think that too.
But from the general's description of a brokerage, I think that's where we're really headed. IT organizations are not going to be purchasing and putting all these components together in the same way they used to. It won't be at such a small component. You won't be putting the car together. You'll be buying fleets of cars because computing is getting more complex and mobility is making it more complex. So being able to structure SLAs and managed service agreements and what you're going to have to purchase for your own internal private cloud and what you're going to feel more and more comfortable as time moves on, moving to your community, AKA DISA cloud, and your public cloud, AKA folks like us and Amazon and others.
Absolutely.
That's going to be it's the shift really in role of CIOs and IT departments away from it's all my stuff and I've got to put it all together and make it work for you. It's okay, now I've got a number of places I can go to and I can draw upon to solve and burst and expand when necessary to solve any need.
It's interesting to me to see the players too. Remember, Google was once a search engine, and Amazon sold books, and things have changed in terms of the markets and the competition in the marketplace. Brigadier General Brendler, let's talk now about the hard things to do. We heard about benefits, we heard about progress, we heard about strategies, but what are some of the challenges that are out there yet, the things that are still difficult, those hoops you got to jump through yet to get to where you really want to go? What are some of the tough things that you face to try to get to where your end goal is?
Yeah, I think I alluded to one of them before, and that is the simple magnitude and complexity.
Yeah.
Or, maybe it's a non sequitur to say simple and the magnitude and complexity of the task at the same time here. But if you think about the fact that the Army's got over 1.4 million employees in this space, and they're located across a vast number of subordinate commands in nearly 150 countries, working on an unprecedented array of complex missions and tasks, many of which are very specialized in nature. You get a feel for this, but it's very difficult to quantify that kind of a challenge. It's just very complex. Yeah. It's a large magnitude. The problem then becomes, how do you assure critical access for all those folks doing all those things to the data and services that they really need to have access to, while properly downsizing our infrastructure to maximize our efficiency, reduce our costs through consolidation, all while maintaining that vital element of security that several on this
Doing all
panel have
this
referred
seamless
to
and keeping
before.
everything running the
Right.
whole time you're doing it.
Plus, we can't tolerate disruptions.
Right.
We have to have continuous service. So this is the magnitude and the complexity of the problem. I think that's the biggest one. Secondly, I would say that after our first couple of years of getting after this, we realize the longer-term consolidation challenge is really related to a separate process that we refer to as application rationalization.
Okay.
In other words, it's not about the physical servers or
Right.
consolidating them into a more efficient physical plant,
Right.
but it's about what we've learned about the applications we're trying to run on those servers and the process we have to go through to decide which ones do we want to keep, because they can be modernized and put in a virtual environment and run on the high-tech, max efficiency, state-of-the-art facility that our industrial partners on the panel have been talking about. But on the other hand, we've got some that either can't be virtualized.
Right.
We got to keep them temporarily because we don't know quite what to do with them yet, but we know we're going to have to eventually sunset them. And some we can kill immediately because we don't really need them anymore.
Right.
So forcing ourselves to go through that is the second challenge that I kind of wanted to hit on.
Yeah,
right here.
excellent, excellent. Rear Admiral Day, challenges.
Well, the general hit on a couple of them, but let me just amplify some of that.
Okay.
Part of it is you would think, okay, we're going to achieve these efficiencies, we're going to be able to get some savings, we're going to be able to, it requires some upfront investment.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you what, that upfront investment, even if you can get a return on investment in under 3 years, is becoming extremely difficult to find in this current environment.
Right.
And in many cases, the efficiencies that have been thought about already have already been taken before we've actually made the moves. And
right.
so that's been a real challenge, is finding that upfront investment to do the consolidation of not only the hardware, but also the application rationalization that needs to be done. The other piece is, okay, we've had 4 or 5 different data centers out there, and they've all had long-term, primarily civilian employees
Right.
that have been working there for upwards of 20, 30 years in some cases.
Yeah.
So what do we do with that group? And they were managing servers, and that business line is moving. So how do you take those employees and move them with it?
Right.
And it's a translation of skill sets to be exactly as
Sure.
the general said. Instead of being a server hugger, how do you end up being a broker of services such that you can speak
Right.
to the operational elements to say, what do you need? Oh, I know what you need, without having to pull out an enterprise service catalog and say, do you need this? Do you need? They will broker what the operator needs and then work with the partners back in the data centers to be able to say, okay, we know exactly what to configure for them. So making that translation of those folks who have been, these are my servers, this is my data center, to being the brokers of those skill sets that now help and do that translation. That's a challenge.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
And there
I'm
are
sure
some
it is.
people
I mean,
who,
people's jobs are at stake here, and that gets everyone excited.
so the other piece is, as we consolidate, you've got to, seriously think about disaster recovery. Where am I going to have my alternate places
Absolutely.
and everything like that? And that's where we can work together with DISA, saying, okay, even if I'm still maintaining a data center, where can I use your services to be able to have that hot backup?
Sure.
And from a global perspective, because again, when you're working regionally around the world, you don't want to center everything in just one geographic location.
Right.
So those are the challenges of thinking that through and then figuring out what the solution sets for them. But
Yeah,
it's
excellent.
becoming more challenging in this budget environment.
Yeah, excellent point. Stephen Cronin, what do you think? What's some of the big challenges that you see with trying to move these programs forward?
Well, this has changed over the last 12 to 18 months, but I would say right now there's a proliferation of sub-agency data centers and applications. It's a challenge for the end users, obviously, but also a challenge for the manufacturer general. You referenced earlier the fact that DISA is taking over the core data centers for the DoD. That's a Herculean task to try to unify all of the vested interests and conflicting applications, and it's challenging for the end user, but as I said, for the manufacturer. Admiral, you referenced standardization earlier. That's also a huge challenge. What may work well with one particular agency may not work as well for some of the others. So our specific challenge is trying to just raise awareness as the customers are progressing through consolidation that their existing infrastructure is not necessarily set up and optimized for the consolidated environment.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting point. Colin, Coyle, what are some of the challenges you see your customers facing, or challenges you face trying to help your customers move forward?
Sure. So one of them is as the Admiral just mentioned, is I think this struggle that comes down between IT and facilities, because at the end of the day, consolidation is a physical thing as well. The virtualization tends to be the first thing folks do, and everyone gets things virtualized. So we start to see some efficiencies on that front. But at some point in time, you need to actually physically consolidate. And,
sure.
And we tend to think only of the IT infrastructure, but the facilities infrastructure, the stuff that's there for 20 to 50 years, is harder to do. And it's
right.
usually a different organization than the IT organization that gets involved in that.
Right.
So how do you bring things like energy savings, performance contracting? How do you actually monetize the ability to save energy, to save floor space, to return floor space to other uses, other practical uses? How do you make some of those real estate decisions? So we really see that one of the complexities and one of the opportunities here is to be able to marry the IT infrastructure and the efficiencies that can be gained from them, from faster servers, from virtualization, from applications rationalization, to how you marry that with the thing that's a 20 and 50-year
right.
investment. Really, the long pole in the tent
sure.
is those facilities that you're going to be stuck with for a long time that you decide to move into. So how do you marry those two things together? And that's a difficult leap to make, because
yeah.
that's where all the capital really lies. And if we can figure out how to capitalize based on efficiency over time and bring those dollars up front to be able to affect the change in the investment you need right now, that's the real trick.
Yeah, fascinating, fascinating. Paul, Christman, what do you think? What are some of the challenges you're seeing, that the hard things to get done?
Sure. I'll put it into two groups. One of them is speaking as a supplier to the government marketplace. The first big challenge that we have to work on together is rewriting the rules for how we sell technology to the government. We need to get away from we sell, you buy, you own, to a much more flexible, appropriate model in a consolidated data center that's based more on consumption rather than ownership. I think there's going to need to be a lot of vendor relations that need to be rewritten away from, Admiral, as you said, server huggers. You're not going to own things. You're going to use things. You're going to lease things. You're going to have different financial models, and hopefully those different financial models will allow us to get past this high upfront cost of transition. We can move into a more flexible financial model. The second is more personal, and it's more inside. And it's finding that equilibrium, that balance between commoditized IT services and flexible, end-user responsive, line of business-oriented service delivery. I think we need to find that right equilibrium. We haven't gotten there yet. We're moving the pendulum back towards commodity, and the end users are going to tell us when we've moved too far towards a commodity, simple, efficient, economic, excuse me, and move back towards this idea of flexible, responsive, delegated authority down to the line of business.
Yeah, very well put, and I think you're right on some of those points, especially the acquisition challenges. I think it's going to take some creative approaches, some creative acquisition officials to really figure out models that work, and I think we're going to have to find some models that work that then could be, spread around town as here's a good way to do this, because I've seen some that have not worked. I want to talk about the future and shift a little bit in our program, but first we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. The Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Rear Admiral Day from the Coast Guard, Brigadier General Brendler from the U.S. Army, Paul Christman from Dell, Stephen Cronin from Schneider Electric IT Federal Solutions, and Colin Coyle from HP Enterprise Group Technology Services, the consulting group. And we're talking data centers. Let's talk a little bit about that energy question. We talked energy before. Let's start this time with Stephen Cronin, since this seems to be right in the heart of what you do and what you're doing. What are you seeing in terms of energy savings possibilities and use of energy savings performance contracting?
So energy savings is a core value proposition of the solution that I referenced earlier, the pod approach to data center design. One key element to remember when someone is considering consolidating into a facility is that they don't necessarily have to choose the most energy efficient site. One challenge, something that's actually been slowing progression with some customers, is trying to figure out where's the best place to move into. The idea of the pod architecture is that you don't necessarily have to choose the most efficient site. You can actually migrate in your existing facility. As it relates to energy savings performance contract, there actually has been a significant interest in the concept of alternative finance vehicles.
Right.
ESPCs is one example of that.
Right.
I
think it makes such good sense, but I understand OMB has had some holdups and.
Well, yes, but that hasn't decreased the quantity of these. There's a significant amount of interest because it basically allows you to move forward with capital improvements based on energy cost savings over a set time period.
Right.
So the quantity of these has definitely increased in the last 12 months. I think at this point where we are, because awareness is much higher than it was, is where to go when you want to begin to consider this.
Right.
Very different than a traditional contracting method. And there's
Sure.
a group within the Department of Energy called FEMP,
Right.
Federal Energy Management Program, and one of their mandates, one of their functions is to provide guidance to agencies considering an ESPC.
Right. Brigadier General Brendler, do you factor energy savings into some of your planning here cycle and have some idea of what types of savings are possible?
Yes, we do, and I'll get to a number, but
Okay.
first just want to caveat it by saying that it's not an exact science for us.
Right.
As we set out in our data center consolidation plan execution and started to ask ourselves this very question, how much energy are we consuming in our data centers? We were facing...
easy answer to the question.
It was hard to quantify.
Well, you talked
because-
about the complexity of what you have out there. I could just imagine trying to measure what is our current baseline must be a very difficult task.
And specifically, we don't have meters on our data centers at individual facilities on Army installations.
Right.
We meter the installation
Right.
and how much energy it consumes from commercial providers
Right.
or
But
from
not
its
the
providers in
specific
general,
data center.
but not the specific data center buildings. So
Interesting.
we've had to develop in partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installation and Energy and Environment, IE&E, a model with which to perform some calculations that constitute estimates.
Right.
And as a result of that effort, we've been able to estimate that through the 185 data center closures mentioned, or correction, the existing data center closures that we've done to date, 138 as of today. We've been able to save roughly $685,000 in annual energy savings.
Oh, good. Excellent. Excellent that you have those kind of measures. We're getting to the point where we've got about 12 minutes or so left to the show, and I always like to talk about the future. You know, to me, the exciting part about all the topics we talk about is we know where we are today, but where are we going down the road? Where's this all going? What's it going to look like maybe 5, 10 years out? So let's talk about that. Let's share a vision for the future. What improvements will we see in government in, let's say, next 5, 10 years that could be attributed to some of these efforts that are going on today? Let's start with Colin and work our way right down the table here. Colin, what's your crystal ball look like? Where's this all going?
Well, it's always dangerous to try to get, even 5 years is a dangerous place in IT to be. Certainly 10 and 20 years is really blue sky. But I think the pendulum shift that we're seeing, the journey that we're on now through transformation and this journey to this nebulous thing we call the cloud is we're going to see government in particular probably have about a 60-30-10 split of 60 private cloud, 30% community cloud. So in the DoD's example, core data centers and DISA, core services from DISA, taking up about 30% and maybe even 10% of public cloud. If that were the paradigm, if we writ that large across government, I think in probably 5 years we're going to start to see those numbers begin to shift. And it's going to be one of those bathtub curves where it begins to shift, and I don't know how long it's going to take to do this. But I think, that's one prediction. I think the other is, it's always what you don't think is going to happen.
Right.
We're coming back to this sort of centralized concept of centralized consolidated data centers. Probably downstream, they'll end up getting distributed again. They'll
Yeah,
be
who
much
knows?
smaller,
Yeah.
much more energy efficient, as Stephen brought up. This concept of pods. Our servers now are getting unbelievably efficient. We have a product at HP, the Moonshot product, which is 98% more efficient. So I think we're going to see a point in time where data centers, which now take up about 2% of the Earth's energy, and predicted to be 2030 if we stayed on the path we're on today, would be about 4%, which would be equivalent of the aviation industry. That's the amount of energy data centers are going to consume by 2030. That's the prediction. But I think we're actually going to see that shift. I mean, I'd make a bold statement that I think we may solve a lot of our energy problems by solving our data center problems.
Wow,
So.
very good. I like that. Good prediction. Stephen Cronin, what do you think? What's it look like? Where's this all going?
Well, as Colin said, it's very difficult to look 5+ years out into the future.
Right, but I do it anyway. I mean,
Right. But I think 5 years from now, it might actually take more than 5 years to get through this round of consolidation, and then it'll be ready for a whole other round of consolidation. I think we're going to see dramatic improvements of efficiency. And I think that the budget issues are not going to get any better. I think that you're going to see a dramatic increase in the use of ESPCs to fund these projects as time goes on.
Very good. Paul Christman, what do you think? What's it look like down the road for you?
I think we can connect the present trends to the future state that I see, which is a software-defined data center, a data center that is managed and monitored in near real time, and the responsiveness of the data center is near real time. So a consolidated data center that's software-defined rather than hardware-defined. I think we're on that path now. I think it's going to take us 5 years to make that transformation, to get to consolidation, to get to virtualization, to get to cloud, and then get to software-defined data center.
Wow. I was in a discussion not long ago about living in the future and living in what was called the fifth dimension, when time begins to equal zero, and decision-making comes down to time equals zero. I mean, decisions have to be made instantaneously for just about everything that goes on, and that's critical. And it sounds like your concept of the software-defined data center is taking us that direction. Brigadier General Brendler, what's the future look like to you? What do you see as sort of the outcome and the future looking like as these programs evolve?
Well, I think these three gentlemen have pretty well described the way I think about a farther future, beyond 5 years out, looking at successful implementation of a joint information environment that leverages state-of-the-art capabilities in data center architecture, among other forms of infrastructure. High-speed connectivity that has the appropriate robustness and survivability is another important factor for us. But what I'd really like to do is focus on a vision for something a little bit more near term for us within the next 5 years.
Sure.
We've recently celebrated our success as the Army being the initial service partnering with DISA to implement Defense Enterprise Email. For us, this was an initial enterprise service essentially moved to the cloud, kind of what we've been talking about, in consolidated data centers run by our government partner. But it's just the initial one. Right. So we need to kind of try to replicate that success with some other things. So in terms of vision, I think that's going to be what we would call unified capabilities or unified communication, UC, and then potentially also collaboration at the enterprise level, content management services at the enterprise level, again, provided through a DISA cloud service. Additionally, we're working with DISA as the DoD cloud broker to steer owners of applications that are internet-facing to a public commercial cloud capability, sort of along the lines of the mix that some of the other panel members have been talking about for the kinds of cloud service that DoD would leverage. Again, our long-range goal is not to be in the business as Army of owning hardware, but instead to take maximum advantage of managed services, at least in the institutional portion of our overall network. I think that we're probably still going to need, in our tactical space, where we're actually on somebody else's soil facing people shooting at us, to own the equipment with which we provide service to the guys who are doing the shooting on our behalf.
Sure.
So in that tactical space, I think we'll have to build out and own a portion of the cloud that provides the right fraction of the overall distribution of data capability in that tactical space.
Yeah, very well put. Very well put.
So that's kind of my
Very
view
good. I like
for
that.
now.
You solved the culture issue with the email consolidation, but when we have people shooting at us, it's going to be a little bit different question, you know, in terms of how we're going to approach that one. Rear Admiral Day, what's the future look like to you, sir? Where's this all going?
Let me just finish this thought that we've got here.
Okay.
And I totally agree with the general. Unless HP would like to go into a war zone and set up a shop there. And the piece that's going to put this together, and is a problem right now for these centralized services, is that network. I mean, it's great when you're sitting in a federal office building with multiple megabytes of connectivity to get back to a main data center to get your email. Try that aboard a Coast Guard cutter in the Bering Sea in 40-foot waves when all you're living off is a 512 kilobit per second, KU band satellite. That piece there is still a problem, which means we're going to have forward deployed capability that asynchronously probably links back to these data centers. So again, it's a tailoring of those services. So let's get to the future. So the future in 5 to 10 years from now, as an operator on the front lines, and I need a new capability, I'm basically going to be able to go to an enterprise catalog or a console and say, I need this, I need it now, and I only need it for these 10 days. Somewhere back in and literally, it's going to be no different than me going on to the internet now saying, I want a Google Plus account, I want this much storage in the cloud to go with it, oh, I want video conferencing with that, and those types of capabilities. We're going to be able to provision that because it's going to go back, that request will go back into some federated capability where it will get sorted out by these folks, this new group of people who are going to translate mission requirements and look at the plethora, whether it be federal, whether it be from the private sector, and they're going to figure out what is the right mix to solve that equation.
There'll be an app for that.
There'll be an app for that, and that's where the value add is going to be. And we've talked about it numerous times, is the contracting mechanisms behind that are not today's contracting mechanisms.
Right.
They're going to be essentially prearranged that this capability is there for this price, and then you can order against it. So that's going to be a paradigm shift that is going to have to occur. But in the future, for us to be successful in that type of environment, that shift is going to have to be there. Because that's what our users want. They see the consumerization of the way things are now, and I can buy on demand from Comcast cable and watch my television show.
Right.
And I understand automatically what it's going to cost me as soon as I push, I bought it. Mm-hmm. We need the same capabilities in terms of provisioning services that we provide now, such that it's not this 18, 24-month cycle of looking for a CLIN and seeing if it fits. They're already understood, and we know if we hit buy, you just bought it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We know our kids are not going to say, I need this new app, and have someone say, well, we have to go through a competitive process that can take 6 months and whatever, and there'll be 2 generations of additional apps out before you get the first one in. Let me do some summary here. This was a great show, folks. Some great content here. We talked about progress, 138 centers over the Army. That's impressive. We talked about we're modernizing. And the other thing that came across in progress was the transparency and the knowledge of what's out there. the baseline, because once you have that, it makes a lot of these other decisions fall in place. Benefits, we have the obvious ones of money savings, of course. That's what it's all about in some sense. But we're also seeing a lot more savings in space, process improvement. I heard standardization, which leads to better security programs. I hear power savings. I hear human resource savings, and all kinds of benefits coming out on a day-by-day basis. We talked about cloud and managed service. I think we've all agreed that we're going to have a mix of private, public, hybrid clouds in the future. There's never going to be sort of a one-size-fits-all kinds of things. The challenges are out there. This is complex stuff. It's it sounds straightforward, but when you actually get out there and look at the complexity, they're there. And in addition to the complexity, we can afford no downtime. So you need to continually be operating while you're doing all the modernization. And of course, there are issues with jobs and individual job changes taking place as the mix changes. And I think it's come up a number of times. The acquisition processes are going to be challenges because it's going to be different in order to move forward. We talked energy savings a little bit, and one thing we heard is they're significant. We're saving lots of energy going through this process. In terms of the future, I think there's widespread agreement, better efficiencies. I like the concept of the software-defined data center. And I like the fact that as we do more of this, it allows the agency to focus more on mission and less on worrying about what that IT infrastructure looks like. The IT infrastructure, I think, it gets viewed as a utility, and it's there. When I think of the future, I wonder, will there be a next generation of data center consolidations? Will there be like a GSA that's like a DISA, where GSA now starts consolidating other agencies begin to consolidate? There's the culture challenge. But if you think about it with dollar savings and tight budgets, that could be the next phase. With that, I want to say some thanks here. Thanks, first of all, of course, to our panelists for taking time from your busy schedules to come be here with us, and to the sponsors for sponsoring our show. Without you, we don't have a show. Thanks to the kind people here at Federal News Radio who do such a good job accommodating us, and most importantly, thanks to our listening audience out there that tune into the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.